Hi, I'm Priyanka Chaturvedi, and I'd be in conversation with my parliamentary colleague Dr. Amar Patnaik, who has been author of several books. But this book happens to be extremely important. It talks about the COVID disruptions, how Odisha managed to control the entire pandemic, at least in its state, and has sent lessons across the country on how to ensure equitable health. So we're going to have discussions. He's spoken on AI, he's spoken on technology, he's spoken about personal data protection law and many other things, and we'll be in a conversation with Dr. Amar Patnaik. So firstly, many congratulations, Dr. Patnaik, on this extremely important, relevant and well-timed book. I'd begin with my first question because I think that is on everyone's mind. And I would say pandemic was one dark chapter in the world history, and how we managed to overcome it, right from our vaccination to COVID management. And Odisha has given very important lessons, right from its disaster management as far as cyclones are concerned to this. What do you think, and how do you think Odisha managed to set a model, the Odisha model, for India to follow or India to learn from? And what do you think going forward we should be looking at?
See, Priyanka, what happened during the pandemic, this is once in 100 years. So nobody really had a model. We just had the Disaster Management Act. But Odisha's advantage was that it had handled the various natural disasters. And we face all of these disasters at least twice or thrice a year.
Yeah.
So we had this experience, and we thought that in the absence of any other model or framework, let's adopt that particular model. Now, one of the key components of that model was, is preparedness. So early preparedness and building community resilience, community partnership. And that has been the success. That is at the core of the success of the Odisha model as far as natural disaster management, handling management is concerned. And so we imported that. Odisha was the first state to in fact have those isolation wards. Our Chief Minister Naveen Patnaik went to the assembly washing hands, do that hygienic, to convey the importance of hygiene. And so he did it himself. So when he started doing it in the assembly, people are wondering why he is doing this. But that was a part of being prepared early on for this, and this was taken completely from the disaster, just as you take the cyclone alerts from the computerized models. And so that's what we did, set up the isolation wards, and then build community, education of the community that a disaster like this would be happening. Once it had happened 100 years ago, one never knows what would happen. But the first phase, the important thing was to maintain hygiene. So washing of hands, putting on the masks, social distancing. So this was communicated to the people in the rural areas to build this community, buy-in and resilience. And that worked wonderfully. In fact, Odisha was the first state, probably the only state, which gave the power of the district collector to the sarpanches. To empower them.
Oh, that's very interesting. Decentralized.
So it decentralized it so that they take charge of their community, and it worked beautifully. In fact, you'd be surprised to know that villages in Odisha, they didn't even allow their own people who had gone to the cities to work. When they wanted to return back, they were asked to wait outside the village in a separate house for isolation ward 7 days, and then allowed to enter.
So they took it as a personal responsibility.
They took it as a personal responsibility. Okay. Now, this is on the health front. But during the pandemic, it was not just a question of health. Making food reach the people who were earlier depending on only cooked food, home cooked food. It was also dependent on children to look after the children, look after the women. Now, or even the another important aspect was those who are having thalassemia. They require blood, so you have to collect blood as well. Our party as a whole, the workers, party cadres, particularly the youth and the and the students, they, despite the pandemic, despite the danger of having social contact, they came in large numbers. As a party, we collected blood and kept our blood banks full so that the thalassemic patients do not face problem. As far as food is concerned, we ensured that our women self-help groups, they took the lead.
Yes.
They distributed this food to the doorsteps of people in villages. Now, I don't think all this could have been possible through a government machinery. This is possible because community leadership has been built over the years. And the Chief Minister was very clear that it is through them He was only sending the message. People, the community believed in him,
Right.
believes in him completely.
We saw that happen in Maharashtra too, where the chief minister was in a continuous conversation, and Maharashtra model also
Absolutely,
was
absolutely,
acknowledged
absolutely.
for that. Exactly that.
Particularly in Mumbai, those big
Yes, the Dharavi
things.
model that has
Dharavi
been
model,
spoken
yes.
about.
So that is, I think, the second aspect here was during immunization. The vaccination. Now again, during vaccination, there was no hesitancy, absolutely no hesitancy. In Odisha, there was no hesitancy, despite probably lack of knowledge and education about what vaccines are. That is because people trusted the CM, trusted that if he is doing it something, he is doing it for our good.
Right.
And that has been the hallmark of our government, the model that CM has always said, every life is important for me and therefore it has to be protected. That's the direction to the bureaucracy. That's the direction to everyone. And following that up, the idea was that if the people are not coming to you, we have
How are
taken
you going to
vaccine.
the
We have
people?
taken vaccine to old people who are unable to move from their houses
Right.
and vaccinated there.
Right.
That has also
And it's the same model you all followed for the booster dose as well.
boosted doses as well.
Very interesting. Now, you also in your book, you mentioned how effectively you all managed through community radio, communication through community
That's right.
radio. And you've also spoken about women leadership.
Absolutely.
How important do you think is, and of course, your collection of essays, what I like about your essays here is that you have spoken about the problem, you've spoken about the challenges, you've also given a conclusion, as in how what are the ideas that you think could resolve these issues. So that's very interesting. And going back to the women leadership, where I think Odisha has taken a lead, including your own party that you come from, has taken a lead in that. What would you
Absolutely.
want to say?
You see, during the pandemic, we could see this in full display when our regular government extension mechanism available to convey the message of hygiene to every household, the women leadership, the women self-help groups, they took it to the households much faster than them. Now, women leadership has evolved over a period of time. It is just not that during the pandemic it happened, because right from the beginning, our CM Naveen Patnaik believes and continues to believe that it is not really women-centric development that's important. It is women-led development, which is now what the government of India is saying, or in the G20.
It's saying.
But actually, we said that Naveen Patnaik said that
He's doing.
the double engine of growth, the actual double engine of growth are women. And it makes sense because your labor force participation of women in India is so low. Unless you bring them forth and they become an equal partner to men in the labor force itself, the growth will not take place, the equity in the system will not be there. Besides gender equity, the normal societal equity will also not improve.
Right.
So I think women are at the fulcrum of Odisha's model, Odisha's development story, and they will continue to be so. What we have done extra is political empowerment. Everybody talking about economic empowerment, the social empowerment, but we said, our government, Naveen Babu says that there should be 1/3 reservation for women, even in assemblies and in the parliament. And we did it by giving 1/3 candidates tickets in the parliament. So if the other parties are not doing it by passing an act in the parliament, which he is pushing for, at least do it yourself. And that's what he did.
Absolutely.
So political empowerment, giving political space to women is actual empowerment, and that's what Odisha model is. One of the pillars of Odisha model is this: that empowerment of women in complete shape, social, economic, and political.
And I think that is why the Chief Minister continues to be very popular, not just in his own state, but across the country.
Yes.
Because he has taken a few visionary steps, which many rarely follow.
In fact, I remember when I spoke about it, you were clapping, saying that women reservation and all that. I
Yes,
remember.
absolutely, absolutely. So now my second question to you, because you've written on artificial intelligence, you're talking about creating a regulatory mechanism, and I think it is a need of the hour. The way artificial intelligence is moving leaps and bounds, there are also fears in the direction it may move. And there are also the benefits that you see out of AI. There's a biggest fear that I've also written to the IT minister on this. The biggest fear is that women, because of the representation in the coding space and AI space, is very limited. The responses and the coding that happens comes from a very male perspective. Don't you think that is also something that we should, as parliamentarians, we should be discussing and finding solutions to? I have written to the IT minister. I said India would be taking a lead in that. It's a matter of time where India would also be one of those nations which is contributing effectively. What do you think?
Very, very interesting perspective. In fact, AI itself is a very interesting perspective because it's evolving. The way it is evolving is not known, it's not currently regulated uniformly all over the world, not even not in our country. Countries are grappling with handling data and machine learning and the AI that is developed, that the algorithms that develop out of that. But the perspective that you are bringing, that the coders who are writing the codes are mostly male, and therefore there will be a bias in these codes, I think makes eminent sense. I have not discussed about this in the book, but I think you have given me food for thought for my next article, which is
Come with a conclusion though. What do you think the IT minister should be doing?
No, I entirely agree, because the perspective that women would bring into this ecosystem is something which can't be discounted. When it is very important, and maybe the sensibilities in society which are there but not captured in the data space or in the AI space, in the computer space, would get captured because of involvement of women. So I still feel that more important than coding, this is my thought, that at the design stage itself, women should be involved, because they would bring a perspective about society which generally is more equitous,
inclusive.
more inclusive, and more balanced.
True.
And I think that's very important. So you have made a very important point. In fact, I support you in this.
Thank you so much. So I've given you food for thought for your next book, perhaps.
Thank you.
Now, you've been very passionately writing about personal data protection law, which is still not anywhere near the horizon. A lot of discussions, lots of back and forth happening. You were part of the committee as well. And your concern has specifically been on the overarching authority of the central government. And it could be anyone in power. It is the overarching authority that the government wants to control. And you've also spoken about a statutory body, like a constitutionally valid body, that like we have the Election Commission, we have the SEBI, etc. SEBI is also under a cloud of doubt right now, but we have a constitution.
SEBI is not a constitutional, it is actually a statutory body. And Election Commission and all, they are constitutional bodies.
Okay.
So I am trying to plead for that. Because,
to make it a constitutional.
To constitutional body, not even a statutory body, because you can change the statute and then things change. Why I am saying it, that is probably your question, is because the central government is the biggest data fiduciary. It collects the maximum amount of data. How can it be judging its own case of whether there is data, in case there is a data breach or data misuse or abuse? How can it be sitting on judgment over itself? Therefore, a body which is to be there, which is completely independent from central government or any government for that matter, is important. That's what I have pleaded. The second point which I have mentioned is the necessity for each of the states having their separate data protection authorities. Because if central government alone sets up this body, it will be sitting in judgment over data which is generated out of state laws passed in state governments.
Absolutely.
And thirdly, data breaches also happens not just because of state actors, non-state actors, about which you have to be very careful. And cross-border data flow, during cross-border data flow, if there are data breaches, the country from whose data has been probably breached in our country, they should trust the system in our country. Otherwise, they will not send data. So you need to have a body on an entire ecosystem around privacy, which is respected by the other countries,
other nations as well,
other geographies as well. So these are the concerns which I continue to air every way. I spoke about it in the committee. I have written in this book, and I continue to feel that unless this is done, then actually in the longer run, India would suffer, because countries, while signing their free trade agreements, would hesitate to send data of their citizens to a country where the system is not completely independent of the government. Just as we would feel if our data is to go to Afghanistan, and we feel that,
no, we women definitely won't be comfortable.
Won't be comfortable. So it is just like that. So I'm not saying that India is like Afghanistan, but we could be a model If we have this system,
Model for Afghanistan.
model for European Union, which is
Yeah.
having the EU GDPR,
Yeah.
we could also for the other states. But at the same time, regulation should be so tough that it kills innovation. So data use, currently the world over, the crux of innovation, what goes into innovation is how do you use data?
Right.
How in a very intelligent way or in ingenious ways, you use data and develop different things. So access to data, development of innovation arising out of data should be promoted, but within a regulatory framework which would ensure that the privacy of that data is maintained.
Maintained, yeah. Now, coming back to regulatory frameworks, etc., we've spoken about, and there are many topics that you've covered in your book also. And most importantly, and it's a big discussion point even in our G20, and the finance minister has spoken about it, is the future of cryptocurrency. And where do you think, I'm not talking about digital assets, I'm talking about cryptocurrency. I remember having this conversation, there was this entire conversation about banning it. And India did move towards that, it was struck down by the Supreme Court. Banning is not an answer. How do you think moving forward, considering our youth is very attracted to such ideas, is working around these ideas, what should be as per you, a solution to having a coexistence of the old world versus the new world order?
No, as you said very correctly, the crypto is such, whether as in a currency or as an asset class, is something which is based on a technology which is here to stay.
Yeah,
and that is peer-to-peer, blockchain. Now, if it is peer-to-peer, it breaks geographies. The transactions would happen, continue to happen, even if you don't like it.
Yes.
So instead of allowing transactions to happen below the surface, below the regulatory surface, why not create an environment which would promote this for innovation, as I said before, but within a regulatory framework, so that in case there are bad actors, or there are bad transactions, or there are situations where there is a fraud, then it can actually be prosecuted. In fact, I spoke in the parliament, you would remember, I asked a question to finance minister when they were thinking of a ban kind of a thing. Do we have the regulatory capacity to enforce a ban?
Exactly.
If we do not have the regulatory capacity, then at least think about building capacity to regulate that particular thing. Because even if you don't, if you like it or you don't like it, if majority of the transactions in our money supply system moves to a crypto virtual, then what would the RBI do?
Right.
It will be a complete challenge to the financial stability of a country, of a nation. And therefore, I have been writing in this book also, I have written about an international order, global order, based on certain principles, so that the entire ecosystem will develop, but in a regulated environment.
Very right.
And this is what currently India's stand is. The finance minister also went and spoke in IMF about it, and in the G20, there is a G20 meeting. And that's my idea about cross-border data flow through also. That we need to have an international regulatory regime, maybe something like WTO, with enforcement powers, so that if countries flout, non-state actors flout, something happens, then there is a body to look up to. If countries flout, somebody to look up to. Why I am saying this is because you can't ban it. That technology is already there. This is just one use case.
True.
Just because you can't control one use case, you can't completely ban the technology.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now coming back to COVID, you've also highlighted a very important point which usually is very under discussed in the country and should be actually discussed a lot more, which is mental health. And I read in your book that you had asked a parliamentary question regarding data, and they said they are not maintaining that data.
They're not maintaining that data.
And I can't even begin to tell you how our young or women who choose to be homemakers are going through, farmers, businessmen, small entrepreneurs. It is a huge challenge that is facing us.
Absolutely.
How, moving forward, I mean, we identify this as a huge challenge. It is a challenge to do with the larger scheme of things. Where do you think, from what perspective should India be looking at it? And in terms of policy, how can we make our policy more inclusive to include the idea of mental health being a challenge?
In fact, I wrote about this because you would remember during the pandemic, all these issues were coming up, which was probably there, was definitely there earlier,
Yeah.
but was not being spoken
It
about.
wasn't.
It was submerged under other issues.
Yeah.
But I think the first point is to recognize that mental illness is a huge challenge. Now,
Yes.
unfortunately, and had that recognition been done, then we would have been having the data.
The data.
And that's unfortunate. Unless you recognize, how can you solve a problem?
Yes.
And this illness is also, you would have seen that, actors, actresses, homemakers,
Yeah.
everyone faces this. Unless you get data and then do targeted interventions, and a lot of it has to also be done through the educational system. We have to first recognize that this can happen at any stage. It is not a stigma to be
Yes,
called
absolutely.
mentally ill,
Yes.
because it is equally important to also recognize that mental illness is not an illness which will remain forever. It can be cured
Yeah.
if it is recognized, if it is treated.
And it can be supported.
It can be
through
supported
medical interventions.
So I think here the role of the government is much more. While societies, families, communities will support, but then you need to check. You first need to give counseling. You need to have proper counselors who can do this.
Right.
You need to recognize that this also must be happening in rural areas. Where is that data? Whether the data is being collected or not? What kind of impact it could have on the education of our future generation?
Absolutely.
These are important issues. I was very surprised when I wrote this and
Yes,
that question was there.
even I was, when I saw that question where you mentioned this, I was taken aback that we are not even maintaining that
Maintaining
data. Data has been a bit of a challenge as of lately in the country, and
I've written about that too.
Yes.
Data equity, data governance model.
Yes, and you've spoken about environmental issues as well, women empowerment, like I said, we spoke about. But what is an interesting part is about your stance on transgender rights and why we should be discussing that. It is a hot topic right now. Supreme Court is also hearing whether we can legalize gay marriages. And so what do you think moving forward, India as a government? I'm not talking from the perspective of we are hearing what the Supreme Court is doing, judiciary is doing. We also understand the sentiment that prevails in the civil society. What do you think as a part of the governance model we should be looking at?
You see, Supreme Court is currently looking at whether to accord cohabitation, marriage and rights. Cohabitation rights, in fact, was there from before. Whether this will be recognized under the Special Marriage Act. What the government is saying that that cannot be accepted, and government has its own point of view.
Yes.
Society may be
And the
having different point
communities
of view.
which are
But what actually I've discussed in this article, and what is important to me, whether they are normally biological men or women, or they are transgenders, or the LGBTQ categories, they are human beings first.
absolutely.
So all the rights which are available to an ordinary man or woman should be available to them, which includes food security, health security, clean air, traveling, physical security. Now, many of these things are not even available to them. So doing a system, or having a system in which welfare measures as available to ordinary citizens could also be made available to them, which is what now the government is coming around. They've set up a committee headed by the cabinet secretary to look into these issues, is I think more important. And that should be, I think there should be no doubt or no question on this front, that as a welfare state, as a democracy, and as a country which is emerging, the message should be clear that we care for every citizen, and that includes the LGBTQ. The question of giving marriage rights, that's let the courts decide. But welfare facilities, welfare measures available to ordinary citizens, a man or a woman, should also be made available to them. And I talked about those three securities. They are not physically secure. That should be ensured to them.
Yes.
When they go to the police station, no one should be looking at them as if someone from
Another
planet has landed up.
Sensitivity.
And food security has to be given. Inclusion. So all these inclusive welfare measures should be fully extended to them as quickly as possible. That should be our policy.
Right. Again, because this COVID has made us realize a lot of our rights that we were taking for granted. there were scenarios where those rights were also denied. For example, the vaccination of our children. Example of malnutrition, where we saw challenges. Of course, Odisha managed to do a door-to-door
I have written
delivery.
a point on malnutrition, an article on malnutrition.
Yes, you've written on that.
Yeah.
So the larger point being, of course, there were some states which managed this challenge. There were some which were perhaps not able to match up. What do you think the larger role of the central government should be in certain cases like this? Because everyone is also aware that this was a pandemic that hit us once in 100 years. This could become a scenario moving on. And one very interesting part in your book is where you've spoken about the Epidemic Act, which is, of the
1890s.
1857 or something like that. And how we need to upgrade that. It was more to do, and even the Disaster Management Act has to do with natural calamity, etc. But nobody is talking about the health calamity.
Absolutely.
So you've mentioned that.
That's right.
So overarching, what is a central government's role in creating policies which understand the biological warfare also that could happen? Because as much as everyone hates to say the C word, the China word, and use it in the COVID context, the CC connection, we need to be aware.
That's fine. Fully agree. In fact, if you look at our Disaster Management Act, it is basically, even though everything is covered, but it is largely addressing disasters that we face regularly, like the natural disasters. But you should understand, after the pandemic, which lasted 2 years and probably continuing, whereas a natural disaster, a cyclone or a flood, it comes and then goes back. But this one is global warming. To me, I've spoken about in Parliament, that global warming is the continuing disaster.
Yeah.
And therefore, the Disaster Management Act has to be revisited. A new Epidemic Diseases Act for the health emergency is what I have written about. It is pending. Health is a state subject. Now, I find that in this kind of situations, the central government can't, shirk its responsibility by saying that it is
your responsibility. Huh?
If you remember, at that time, Odisha sent oxygen to almost the entire country.
Yes.
Many states did similar kind of innovative approaches. But I think in these situations, the central government should realize these are emergency times. So the distinction between center's responsibility and the state's responsibility should vanish. The central government used to give directions after, initially, of course, since this was once in 100 years, the framework was not available, so they picked out the Epidemic Diseases Act, some provision, a very omnibus provision, and from the Disaster Management Act, and started issuing directions to the state governments. But the states were doing it at the cutting edge. What is the kind of resource they were getting separately?
Exactly.
For the primary health centers where patients are going, what is the support that they were getting? And that is why I have been saying that we have to invest on health as a percentage of GDP. We have to increase. And the states can't do it just because the state is a health subject, you can't leave it to them.
Absolutely.
The central government has a bigger responsibility to this.
Yeah, and what you've also mentioned about the cess coming into the divisible.
Cess.
I think every state government would agree with you. Every state finance minister would say, yes, Dr. Patnaik, we are with you.
Our CM has written to that, and you remember I spoke about it in the Parliament, and finance minister was trying to give an answer and explaining why it can't be done. But I think it is important. You can't squeeze the states of their financial resources.
Yes, that's been a challenge even during COVID, and we saw state versus center conflict.
Who will pay for the vaccine? Who will pay for the oxygen cylinder?
The train services that were operating at that particular point in time, the transportation that was happening, the states were already burdened with a lot of challenges. For a state like Maharashtra, of course, upgrading and building up its infrastructure, scaling it up, perhaps was, I wouldn't say easy, but a easier task to be done and followed, because as compared to maybe in Uttar Pradesh. So my point here is that these conflicts that keep happening ever since GST was introduced, do we really need to relook? It's a controversial question and you can totally avoid it if you want, but do we really need to relook at our GST model and the functioning of the GST model?
You see, GST was brought in after consensus from the states.
All the states, yes.
The GST Council was formed also after consensus. So I think if the states do not get the benefit that was promised, that was envisaged and promised, that 14% growth, I think that it's not just a question of me or Odisha disagreeing or trying to withdraw from the council. I think most of the states would take up the cudgels on that on similar lines if they don't get any benefit from that system. So currently, however, the structure is very democratic because every state gets to participate, has a voice in the GST
Yes.
council. So to that extent, it's very romantic. But the point is, if the resources which are available for distribution
Are reduced.
are reduced, like I talked about the cess and the surcharges
Surcharges,
goes to the,
yeah.
and then during the last to last finance commission they carved out a fund which will be towards defense and from out of the total tax collected. So that again reduces the funds to be allocated to
the state.
to the states. So what is the point of? I think any central government, irrespective of whoever forms the government at the center, whichever party, should realize that if India has to grow, the states have to grow.
Absolutely.
Unless the states get the fiscal resources, the fiscal autonomy, the wherewithal, the infrastructural support, then India as a nation cannot grow, and even if it grows, it will not be inclusive and equitable. We would have nothing to show to the world as the largest democracy in the world.
Very interesting. And that is absolutely, this is something that every state finance minister feels at this point in time, and it was a struggle during COVID. I must say your book is a masterclass
Thank
for
you.
anyone who wants to understand the challenges the nation is facing and what are the possible solutions. And I think your vast experience during your years in the bureaucracy also helps. So my question, one last question about the bureaucracy. That also comes under a lot of challenge these days. The steel frame that is spoken about. Many say it has rusted at the edges. At the edges, or I think a lot more. Do you think we really need to rethink and have more, some kind of reformation of how the bureaucracy works?
You see, the civil service reforms have been suggested. There have been several committees looking at this, made these suggestions. I have, during my career in the civil services, I have been to several countries and have seen some of the civil services framework of other countries. I think a time has come not to do cosmetic changes,
Yes,
incremental changes, but to bring disruptive. I'm using the word very, very
So give us one
deliberately.
disruptive suggestion.
Disruptive changes and transformative changes in the bureaucracy. Now, when I say disruptive, I think the biggest disruptive change is to link your salary, link your benefits, or link your tenure to performance.
Absolutely. Because politicians right now are under cloud all the time. Performance-based voting happens now. There's more awareness. Don't you think our bureaucracy also should be?
I was just discussing with you, I think, before this discussion, that a politician is held to account every minute.
Every minute.
By
Every
not,
tweet,
by not only his electorate, by every stakeholder who has a stake in the system. The bureaucracy is equally should be accountable, is supposed to be accountable, but I think the amount of commitment that is required across the board, not just there are good bureaucrats. There are people who work really hard,
Yes.
who have contributed to country's development. But there is a large chunk of them who are not performing, underperforming, and they should be weeded out. And that mechanism is not there. I think
I hope you don't lose friends after this.
No, the government has been governments have been trying to grapple with this. You would find that now
Yes.
Rule 56J is applied, but I think cosmetic changes will
Won't
not
work.
change this 75 years of steel frame that we are supposed to be having.
And do you think there should be a cooling off period for bureaucrats to move to politics? Or for that matter, people from the judiciary, people from our military services. There should be a cooling off period?
There are both pros and cons for it. Now, why do people join politics? People are joining politics to be part of the democratic process to represent electorate.
But aren't they doing that through their services, etc.? Judiciary services, judicial services?
No. So the point is, if you are any organ of the government, whether it is executive or the legislature or the judiciary, is contributing to the nation's development and growth, and to the communities, to societies. Judgments are being delivered, things are changing. But an embargo on the bureaucracy, that is the executive or the judicial officer, to join politics right after retirement, I don't think it is necessary, because the joining of politics doesn't guarantee a position. Doesn't guarantee a position. If your question was whether they should get to a position right after retirement,
So let me
that is
reframe that
something,
question.
that is something which
Yes.
probably I think may not be right.
For
And therefore in
example.
government there is a cooling off period.
Yes.
In
So
bureaucracy,
for
there is
example, we've seen cases of senior officers who take voluntary retirement and they're given ticket of a political party to contest the next day. Then they go on to become ministers, etc. So then the question, of course, arises that were they, when they were in services, were they doing the bidding of the government of the day for them to join the party that they have joined? So those are questions that come in any average Indian's mind. I'm not speaking from a political point of view. I'm only speaking as an Indian who's a voter. That those questions come to my mind that, why has he taken voluntary retirement to join the party which is in power? So was he doing during his services, was he actually doing service for the political party? So those are questions. I mean, it's absolutely
these questions. For me, I left, but I was in the central service, so I was not with the ruling government.
Yes, yes.
In fact, my role with the state government when I was there was criticizing the state government through the CAG reports. I wrote a series of reports. But to the question whether they would be aligned to the party and therefore right after taking voluntary retirement the given ticket, the quick view is that it looks like it's not right. But the point is, a person who is doing this should realize that no party is going to be in power for forever.
Yes.
So even if he has got a ticket after resigning because the ruling party he had a relationship, it may so happen that his career ends after the party leaves. So anybody who is trying to follow that route and to be there in long-term politics, I think he is doing a disservice to himself.
Right. I quite agree with you on this. So this was a really lovely conversation.
Thank
I've
you so
asked
much.
you some out of text questions as
Thank
well,
you. Thank
which
you.
you've taken
you always,
with.
You always ask these questions. You always
I
ask
had
those
many
questions.
more questions, but I'll leave it for another interview, probably a more fun interview, which does not concern your book, but only your thoughts on various other issues. But thank you so much, and this has been very insightful and getting to know from you, and after reading your book as well.
And Priyanka, thank you so much, because even in Parliament, I know that you come and give feedback on what I've spoken and what I have
we fight
done.
also. This is something we should people should know, that as parliamentarians we could be good friends, but we fight as well.
And
we have a difference of opinion, but we coexist.
We sit on the other side.
You are now moving more towards the not you as in your party.
We are equidistant.
Let me correct that.
We are equidistant, and you are with the
yes, totally on the other side.
Yes. But really, I get to learn a lot from the interactions that I have had with you, and some of it probably I would have featured in the book. Yes. In some space.
And one thing which is surprising, and I must mention it to whoever is watching, that Amar has also taken a lot of initiatives with regards to handloom, where he started lots of like-minded members of parliament. He brought the group together, we discussed, we used to meet, and we came up with the report. You have written on this as well. So those are efforts he's made. Then as far as technology is concerned, you're working on that as well. So those are really, as a member of parliament, how do you make yourself more effective besides doing your parliamentary obligations, parliamentary duties, and giving your policy ideas? I think that is bringing parliamentarians together, building consensus of the parliament and of our stated stances is also very important. So those are, I think, services that you're doing for the country, which not many know. So should be known to everyone, whoever is watching this, that these are initiatives he's taken, and which is good for the nation as well.
Thank you.
It helps build a consensus. I wish you all the best, and I hope you keep writing some more, of these insightful articles for people to read, follow, and possibly learn from. Thank you so much, Amar.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
So just in case anyone is looking for this book, which we've been speaking about and haven't really shown it, this is how it looks, and it's available on Amazon, right?
That's right, it's available.
And he doesn't give free copies.
No, but after you get the copy, I'm ready to come and take a signature from you.
It can come as your curriculum textbook, right? So you all must have this copy, so especially those who want to get into the IAS administrative services.
No, not really. Those who have an interest in national affairs, those who have an interest in building a strong India, I think.
Yes, strong India. That's the consensus we all have. Yeah. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amar.
Thank you.